As per the news reports, Donald Trump has been threatening to cut off federal funding to California. This is in retaliation for California's persistent political opposition, but the immediate trigger are the riots in Los Angeles against Trump's immigration policies. The National Guards have been called in, but there is no end in sight to the riots. Reports say that even Marines could be brought in. But meanwhile, the immediate trigger aside, California's Governor Gavin Newsom has called the threat of cutting off the federal funding authoritarianism, one that is cloaked in federal authority. But beneath the political rhetoric and the media outrage, something deeper, much more sinister is happening. A structural unraveling of the United States. Welcome to the Drishtikone show, where we go beyond the noise, pierce through the propaganda, and expose the phenomena and actions that others are too afraid to touch or approach. This is not just about politics, you see, it's about rediscovering the truth. Today, we want to bring to you the evaluation of a grave internal threat that the United States is facing because of personality clashes between the US President Donald Trump and the California's Governor Gavin Newsom. But it could be more than personality clashes, you see. We may be watching the cultural and social rupture taking place within the most powerful nation on the planet right in front of us. A new fault line is emerging. It was once inconceivable that an American president would threaten to economically strangle a state for political disobedience, that a sitting governor would threaten to sever the financial lifeblood of the federal government itself. But now this isn't fiction anymore. It's unfolding, raw and real on the national stage itself. Trump is actively pursuing measures to cut off federal funding to California. And California's governor, Gavin Newsom, has responded with something unprecedented, a threat to withhold California's tax contributions to the federal government directly. This obviously goes against the very grain of federalism. Moreover, this is not healthy democratic dissent. In fact, from where we see, this could be the early phase of disunion within the United States. No guns or flag, just ledgers, lawsuits, and a loss of legitimacy. The United States was never meant to be a monolith. It was a federation, a compact between states that agreed to share the sovereignty. We are watching the collapse of that federal compact itself. It now lies in tatters. As Trump's rhetoric gains momentum, the federal government is no longer neutral. It is wielding power not to uphold law, but to punish dissent. Remember that in targeting California, Trump is not confronting a rogue territory. He's targeting probably the fourth largest economy in the world. He's threatening 39 million Americans who live as population within California. And he's declaring war not against a foreign adversary, but against his own union. Let's be clear, California is not just another state. It's a de facto sovereign in everything but name. It's an empire in its own right, a $4 trillion economy, ranking just behind Japan probably, a global leader in technology, media, energy, defense, and climate policy. It's a home to Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and America's AI brain trust. A cultural powerhouse that shapes the world more than Washington ever could. It generates more federal tax revenue than any other state and receives less in return. And now, California is no longer asking to be heard. It's warning that it could walk the talk that many seemingly crazy activists have been talking since Trump 1.0 term. Law is clear and unambiguous. The US Constitution does not provide any mechanism for secessionism. In 1869, in Texas versus White, the Supreme Court made it clear that a state cannot leave the Union except by revolution or the consent of the other states. California's constitution abides by this, declaring the state as an inseparable part of the United States. That's the letter and spirit of the American Constitution. But power, Real power does not lie in clauses, it lies in consent. And what happens when that consent evaporates? When 39 million people no longer recognize the authority of a man they didn't elect, whose policies they reject, and whose government threatens their survival, then the Constitution becomes a relic in their eyes, and sovereignty becomes a question of will, not legality. The irony is bitter. Abraham Lincoln fought a civil war to preserve the Union when the southern states seceded. Trump is provoking a civil rupture by targeting states that remain loyal to the constitutional values but disloyal to him. Is the current president playing with fire and abandoning his role as a unifier? Or is he acting as a punitive monarch using federal dollars as weapons? And Newsom doesn't seem to be bluffing as well. His threat to withhold the California's tax contributions is a declaration of fiscal war, a first salvo in state level rebellion. Let's be clear, this is not about funding. It goes to the very root of the legitimacy of power and union itself. When a state refuses to fund the federal government, it is challenging the union of that country. It ceases to be about resisting policy. And California is not alone. Across the nation, the blue states are watching and discussing in closed chambers. What if the answer is not resistance against a leader and a direction they don't like, but exit from the union itself? No, not with muskets this time, but with constitutional conventions, ballot referenda, digital identity systems, new alliances across state lines. This is the vision of the Blue Bloc, a hypothetical coalition of states like California, New York, Illinois, Washington, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Vermont. Together, they control over 130 million people, more than 60% of the US GDP. Most of the nation's research universities, tech IP, and elite talent. In a sense, the economic, intellectual, and cultural soul of the United States. If these states walk, what remains? The United States was always a delicate compact, not a monolith, but a federation of semi sovereign entities agreeing to be bound under a common constitution. More importantly, it's been held together by the idea of the American dream. And what is this American dream? It's an economic idea that anyone from anywhere who comes to the United States or who lives here can get prosperous if one works hard and does well. It's not a social idea or an ethnic cohesive factor or a religious spiritual underlying theme. If the economic works for people living in the United States, the states remain united. Or else, so when a president targets a state as an enemy, and that state hints at retaliatory autonomy, and public intellectuals like Balaji Srinivasan are proposing that such a peaceful disunion could actually be a win win for all. You see, it goes beyond mere politics. We are now treading the territory of pre-secession psychology. Balaji writes on X that if California breaks away, it could be a huge win win. National Republicans no longer have to deal with California's 54 electoral votes, and Californian Democrats no longer have to deal with the Republicans. Everyone gets what they want. Such lines were once fringe. Now they are mainstream tech and political elites' words. Given what we are seeing and where this is going, let's ask the question that needs asking. Could the US survive without California and the Blue Bloc? Let's break it down. What does US really lose? If California secedes or even meaningfully detaches, the United States doesn't lose territory. It loses its strategic core. A staggering $2.5 to $3 trillion in annual tax base evaporates. But it's not just the money, it's the momentum. California anchors the nation's strategic tech base, from AI and semiconductors to aerospace and quantum computing. The future of the world is built in California. Its deep water ports control the lion's share of Pacific trade. Without them, America's access to Asia is fractured, supply chains snap, influence fades. The state's intellectual capital, from Stanford to Berkeley, feeds America's soft power, startup culture, and federal research ecosystems. Cut that off, and the pipeline of innovation dries up. It also hosts critical military installations, missile defense, naval power, and strategic surveillance outposts. To lose California is to lose not just a state, but the brain, muscle, and nerve system of the American Republic. You don't just shrink the map, you cripple the empire. With the walking away of California, the world of the United States will be in shambles. The credit spine of the US cracks as rating agencies will blink and downgrade will hit like hammer. The dollar, once king, begins to wobble and trust will start bleeding. The treasury markets will lose their anchor and the investors will scatter from the new storm. Allies, stunned and scrambling, could recalculate the decades of defense and diplomacy again. In Brussels, NATO could be staring at an abyss. Without America as a whole, NATO's shield will shatter. The unthinkable begins to feel inevitable, not with tanks, not with bombs, but with fracture and withdrawal. The American empire could start to fold from within, and China could see that as an opening. Taiwan could become vulnerable. Russia could exploit the chaos in Europe, and India could recalculate its strategic repositioning. And Middle East shifts further into multipolar disorder. In short, the American century collapses into a fractured republic. Even without the formal independence, California can begin to build its own sovereign infrastructure. And here is how. A fiscal firewall could be built. Direct federal taxes could come into state-controlled escrow. California could build a state-level digital tax system for California-based multinationals, launch a California sovereign fund, and use tech platforms to create a parallel payment rails. It could create the framework of a parallel sovereignty using digital federalism as the basis. It could launch a state crypto, allowing for economic operations outside of federal reach. It could create a California ID or Cal ID, a secure digital ID, and it could manage the state citizenship digitally, including for migrants and refugees. It could build a cloud-based governance which is separate from the federal databases. It could actually create an entire internal scaffolding for the Blue Bloc. California could form an interstate compact for sovereign autonomy or coordinate with the states like New York, Illinois, Washington to form a Blue Bloc. And for that, it could use interstate compact clause, Article 1 and Section 10, to form legal agreements around shared governance, data, energy, and climate policy. And this could form a confederal governance layer operating beneath the federal control. Going further, it could establish a shared digital identity and tax infrastructure itself. For that, California and the Blue Bloc components could actually develop a Blue Bloc ID, not just a Cal ID, a unified digital identity system for citizens and businesses. It could build a blockchain-based tax infrastructure, allowing the states to collect and manage taxes independently from the federal system. It could introduce digital wallets for social benefits, decoupling welfare from federal dollars. It could build an interstate defense and cybersecurity alliances to share intelligence, cybersecurity frameworks, and disaster response across Blue Bloc states. It could also create a joint emergency command to manage crises from wildfires and cyber attacks without waiting for FEMA or the Pentagon. It could consider forming a civilian cyber state sponsored and backed groups to counteract the digital threats from adversarial states or even federal outreach. It could lead the creation of a blue grid, a decentralized renewable first power grid network which is across the Blue Bloc states. It could use smart contracts to trade energy credits or bypassing the federal regulation itself. for control of narratives. They could reformat the Blue Bloc media and education. They could That could be done by establishing a joint Blue Bloc public broadcasting networks, something on the lines of PBS that Trump is defunding right now, to counter the federal disinformation and maintain a cultural identity as they deem fit. It could create common K to 12 and university curricula that goes across the blue states, emphasizing civil liberties, science, and climate literacy. It to shield from the next generation from the federal ideological swings. We have seen Gavin Newsom travel on his own to do deals with China outside of the federal framework. That could be extended into a full blown international diplomacy. California could sign trade and climate deals with EU, Japan, and the Asian countries. It could, as a state, apply for observer status at the United Nations. And of course, California or the Blue Bloc states could host the global summits independent of Washington, D.C. And next comes the defense autonomy. And how could that be done? Well, the first step could be to expand the California National Guard into a true state defense force. Given the local talent, the state could partner with local contractors for cyber, space, and AI defense. And with that, California could create a state security council to coordinate regional threats. California wouldn't need to declare independence, you see. It could functionally operate as one. And here's the real question. Will Trump let California go, or will he fight to keep it? If the Blue Bloc gains momentum, Trump may have to deploy legal obstructions via the DOJ. He could threaten to nationalize the state assets and call in the military under the call of managing insurrection. He could also launch economic sieges against the seceding states, and this could lead to a chilling possibility. Trump acting as a 21st century Caesar, trying not to preserve the Union but to dominate it. To do that, he could ruthlessly crush those who dissent. And in that world, a second American Civil War does not begin in Texas. It could probably begin in Sacramento or Albany. And it may not be fought on the battlefields, you see, but in cyberspace, supply chains, financial markets, and the legislative chambers. Wars, you see, are not always fought with weapons and ammunition. The rupture of the social fabric can do far more damage than any weapon can possibly do. The all-important question for the patriots of America is there a peaceful way forward? The short answer is yes, but there is a very narrow path, and it could be closing very fast. A true national reconciliation requires rebuilding the federal compact based on mutual respect, ending the political weaponization of the federal powers, and reforming the Electoral College and Senate to reflect the demographic realities, and creating legal mechanisms for peaceful exit as a constitutional release valve. But none of this may be possible under Trump. His model isn't about negotiation. It's about personal gain and complete domination, which leaves the blue states with a simple choice: submit and live under the authoritarian rule, resist and be punished, or walk away and face the wrath of a crumbling empire. You don't need tanks to start a war. You need a collapse of legitimacy. And that's exactly what is happening. When a president treats states as enemies, when a governor threatens to pull the plug on the national treasury itself, when the courts are seen as tools of ideology, when millions no longer believe they share a future. As we said earlier, this is far beyond politics. It's a pre-secession battle unfolding. And California may never formally declare independence, but it is already building a separate nation and its policies and its values and its digital and diplomatic identity. The only question left is, will the United States let it go off peacefully? Or will it fall apart violently, chaotically, and irreversibly from within? What we are witnessing is not merely a political scuffle, but a systemic stress test for a superpower. America's greatest vulnerability is no longer China, it's no longer Russia, it's the internal disunion. A nation where the founders' federal design is being tested by modern tribalism, algorithmic echo chambers, and executive outreach. And California, standing as a techno sovereign behemoth, may just be the first to walk out of the theater itself. If it does, or even gets close to that, the myth of the eternal American unity will collapse. And so will the post World War II world that America helped build. This is Drishtikone, where we look deeper, where we tell stories that others won't. If this story helped you understand the geopolitical situation around India and the world better, then please subscribe, like, and share. And do click the bell icon, please. Most importantly, tell us in the comments. Do you think California could begin the process of seceding from United States itself? Where will that lead the most powerful country in the world towards? How can this slide be stopped? Until next time, Jai Hind.